everybody joining us right now, thank you. I know that a lot has been asked of you in this political season, and we're always saying, we're almost there. Here comes November, and when we get to that big Tuesday in November, our work is done. But we know that there is one absolutely critical last act to this election season, and that is to make sure that we get the Senate into the right hands. It literally all comes down to Georgia. So many of the things that we believe in, to make sure that we actually raise wages in this country, to expand, not reduce healthcare, to make sure that corporations and the wealthy are paying their fair share, to protect the rights of all Americans and the equality of all Americans, to confront racial injustice, to get real on climate change before it's too late. So much of our ability to do any of that, not to mention our ability to confirm appointees who are going to serve the president-elect well, and so much more, depends on ensuring that the Senate is not in Mitch McConnell's hands, but in Democratic hands. All eyes are on Georgia. The whole country has Georgia on our mind. And that's why we need to mobilize from around the country to make sure that we win these critical races. And I'm especially thrilled, proud really, to see how many people who were involved in Win the Era, our nationwide effort to get great people elected to office, and people who had been involved in my own presidential campaign are now once again rising up, snapping into action for the vitally important mission of making sure that the Senate is in Democratic hands. But this is not just about electing any Democrat to the Senate. We also have fantastic candidates in these two races. And Reverend Warnock is somebody who has inspired me from before I knew that it had even crossed his mind to step up and run for public office. I met him when he hosted me at Ebenezer Baptist Church, the church where Dr. King had preached, and spoke with such vision, such foresight, such compassion that I immediately understood why he is a leader so well respected in his community, not just his church community, but in the communities that he serves in Georgia. And I was delighted when we learned that he is going to run. Some of you might have been there when we had another virtual event earlier this year to urge him on in his race and support him, when at the time he was in that multi-way race, vying to just get into the top 2 or 3. Now he has prevailed in that first round. And now that Georgia has been proven to be a battleground state, there is every expectation that he can win this seat if we deliver for him. When we do, we won't just have the Democrat in the Senate in Democratic hands. We're going to have somebody in the Senate who has a unique ability to speak to the issues of the moment, who understands that unifying and reaching out to others is not about watering down our values or backing 1 inch from our bedrock commitments, but can be done in a way that calls more people to what is best in themselves and what could be best for our country. It is absolutely in perfect harmony with the kinds of ideas we talked about in those rules of the road that so many of you took to heart, the values that guided our campaign. And they're one of the reasons why, even if the Senate didn't hang in the balance, I would be enthusiastically asking you to enthusiastically support Reverend Warnock with everything that you've got, time, talent, and treasure. But you add to the fact that the Senate does hang in the balance, and we know what's required of us. So that's why it's so important to me to be here. That's why I'm so thankful that you are here. And without further ado, let me introduce you to the person who America needs and Georgia needs as our newest United States Senator, Reverend Raphael Warnock.
Hi, Mayor Pete. Give me 1 second. We actually had another issue with our tech. So give me 1 second to pull.
All right, go ahead. Stand by. I'll share a few more words. They've got some weather coming through Atlanta. I know that's been impacting the connectivity, so he'll be able to join us shortly. But while Julia's in touch and making sure that we get the Reverend reconnected, and I know she'll flag or wave to me when we've got that. Let me share a couple other things about just what a big deal it is that Georgia is competitive in the way that it was. Who would have thought a few years ago, thinking about what the presidential election map might look like in 2020, that Georgia could be the state to put us over the top. You add to that, again, the fact that we have, in some ways, more ability to mobilize with the focus that we have as a national party on this moment and the unique candidate that Reverend Warnock represents. And it's part of why I'm so hopeful. I see him coming online now. So Reverend, I'm going to toss it over to you. Thank you again for stepping up. And let's just begin by asking you, how does it feel? And what gives you the greatest sense of hope and optimism about what we can achieve in the weeks ahead and get you to victory in January?
Mayor Pete, here's how you know we're going to win. I mean, the Republicans are here messing with my broadband, apparently. Listen, I'm sorry, everybody, about these technical difficulties. We'll have to get on this. I want to thank Win the Era. I mean, you guys are leading in such an amazing way. We've already raised a lot of money on this Zoom call. I feel like the Baptist preacher better talk fast because I don't know how much more time I'll have before we're off again. I'm feeling really good. There's a lot of movement and energy on the ground. Georgians are energized. We're grateful for all of the support we're getting outside of the state. If you have friends and neighbors who are asking, well, how do I help? Tell them to go to my website, warnock4georgia.com. Everything's spelled out. There's a big button there that says volunteer, and you can volunteer right where you are. I'm not saying don't come to our state. We're Georgians, we're hospitable, glad to have you here, but you don't have to leave your state to be helpful. You can volunteer digitally because the game right now is really turnout. And so it doesn't matter where you live, you can text people and call people in the state and remind them to vote. Election day is January 5th. Early voting in person begins December 14th. And what we're doing is trying to make sure that the folks who showed up for the general show up for the runoff. That's been the challenge, quite frankly, with Democratic races in the past. I think this is a different moment, though. People understand literally and have been reminded, right, in such a painful way with the death of Justice Ginsburg, how important the Senate is, not to mention all of the other appointments that President Biden is going to need to make. So tell people they can volunteer right where they are, connect with the campaign, connect with our coordinated campaign, with the OSSOF campaign. And, you know, in the remaining weeks of the election, when we get a little closer, we'll see. I'm sure there will be other folks on the ground here, but we've got to make sure that Georgians are out front.
Right. On that note about the coordinated campaign, what should our supporters know? There are obviously two races happening in parallel, two excellent candidates, and frankly, two opponents who both really need to be defeated. But they are different races. What's the best way to think about that kind of teamwork and that coordination? All right. Sounds like Reverend Signal's freezing up. So while they're sorting that out, let me take a look at some of the. Julia, can you share a little bit about that just tactical side while we're getting the Reverend back up?
Yeah. So your question was about what the coordinated effort's going to look like.
That's right. Yeah. Well, how should supporters, care about both of these races, but they are different races. How should we be thinking about that?
There are different races, but I think right now, what we're all realizing is that these are the two seats that could give Democrats really the ability to be a tool for Joe Biden, right? And not have a repeat of what happened when Obama first won and had to fight against, complete obstruction in the Senate. And so as you're looking at these races, we do have a bunch of opportunities for folks to really support both. There are separate races. John is running against David Perdue, who has been in the Senate for a long time, who is well liked. But there is real concern that he has put his personal interest above those of Georgians, right, as he continues to fight against having the healthcare be available to all Georgians. Kelly Loeffler, generally speaking, is a candidate who was appointed. And I think here in Georgia, a lot of folks want to feel like they've their actual representative. And because she's not, we are really seeing that a lot of folks support her, but they're not exactly sure if they want to actually see her on the ticket. That's why we actually came in first place, right? And so I think that's a lot of credence for how well liked Reverend Warnock is, and that we can actually win this race. And John, be able to come back and actually push an established senator into a runoff says just how much there's a desire to see Georgia flip and be a state that has two Democratic senators.
Absolutely. Reverend, I see we've got you back, and you know, I want to ask you about something else that's really important that I think touched a chord with a lot of our supporters, which is the way that you talk and think about faith in a country and a U.S. Senate that is there to represent people of every faith and of no faith, but where you carry your moral and faith tradition and conviction with you, coming from a place with an incredible tradition of activism in the name of faith. How has that shaped you personally, and how's it driving your campaign?
Yeah, thank you so much. Everything I do is driven by my faith. My dad was a pastor, my mom's a pastor, and I'm pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church. And I think it's unfortunate when Democrats have ceded the values conversation to the other side. Especially, and we respect all faith traditions. But Jesus had a whole lot more to say about your treatment of the poor than these wedge issues that others like to use to divide us. And so I think that in this moment, in which we found, quite frankly, the loudest voice in Christian America on the wrong side of history, again, it might be helpful to have a pastor in the Senate who, when, for example, you have those pushing against the equality of our brothers and sisters in the LGBTQ plus community, use their faith as a weapon and as something to hide behind, and push forward these terrible RFRA bills, freedom of religion. I think it could be helpful to the conversation in the Senate to have the pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church, where Martin Luther King served, and a trained academic theologian say, look, this idea that extending equality to my sisters and brothers is an affront to my religious liberty is deeply offensive. Quite the opposite, that we would do otherwise is an offense to my sensibilities as a person of faith who understands that of one blood God has made all of us to dwell on the earth. And so I intend to lean into that. And look, everything I've tried to do, whether it's registering hundreds of thousands of voters or fighting for criminal justice reform, we've always built multi-faith coalitions to do it. Finally, let me say that when the Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel marched with Dr. King in Selma, Rabbi Heschel said that when I marched with Dr. King, I felt like my legs were praying. And I think in this moment, that's what we need. We need some praying feet to make their way to the polls, certainly, but even beyond that, to help us to rise up in this moral moment in America and claim the best in the American covenant, the covenant we have with one another as an American people, e pluribus unum, out of many one. And I think that all of that is empowered by all of the great faith traditions, and those who claim no faith tradition at all, but are people of moral courage. And that's what we need in this moment.
You know, I got to say, just even hearing you render this in this way and picturing you doing it on the floor of the Senate, it would make the Senate, I think, a better place, and we'd all be well served to have that voice. I want to ask you about building coalitions and bringing people together to get things done, because one of the things that I really admire in you that I've aspired to in my own political vocabulary is finding ways to reach out to others, to connect with others, to build bridges, and do it in a way that is at the same time very firm and very clear on what you believe and on the principles and the values that are at stake. I think there used to be a vision that, you know, to reach out or to try to build a coalition has to mean watering down what we care about, or you know, coming halfway on things where there's really no moral way to do that. But I think there's something different in the way that you find good faith in others. I'd love to hear, especially coming from a formerly red, now purple state like Georgia, how you do that and how that's going to be part of your message over these coming weeks.
Yeah, I think that part of how we do that is to talk about values. I mean, so often we get caught up in the code words of politics, and those words are often field tested, right? Let's be, you know, and there's a reason why those words are being used. You know, someone decided, for example, that the way to defeat Democrats this cycle is to say defund the police, defund the police. And so my opponents keep trying to lob that onto me. And the truth is, I've been working on criminal justice reform for years, and I've never talked about the issue in that way. But they tested it, and it doesn't matter what matters, whether it's true or not. It'll help win the game. But what is it that we care about? We all want our communities to be safe. We want our children. We want to put our children to bed at night and feel like they're safe. And we also want to be able to put them in a car and know that if they're driving and the police pull them over, that they don't have to worry about whether they can get out of that encounter alive. All of us want that for our children. And, I think that the way we begin to build coalitions is to talk about values, faith, compassion, empathy, love. And I think, people say love in politics. Well, justice is what love looks like in public. And the ways in which our stories connect to one another. And so what I hope to do in this campaign as the pastor in the race is not to lose my voice as a pastor. I think we've got enough transactional politicians in politics, and they can stay in that lane if that's what if that's what they want to do. But I think we've got enough of that. And I'm really in love, not with politics, but with change and with humanity. And politics is for me a tool to get there. And I think if you can wear that with a loose garment, you have the capacity then to reach over into spaces that seem counterintuitive, pull together unlikely alliances, and solve the big problems that are confronting us right now. Problems that certainly can't be reduced to left and right. Climate change is too big of a problem to talk about in those ways. Poverty is too big of a problem. It's not, right and left is right and wrong. And if we could sit down and have those conversations, and if those of us who read from the same book might be able to talk about it in those ways, not in a way that leaves others out of the conversation, but again, lifts up values, who we are, I think we might have a chance.
Well said. Everybody out there, I want to draw your attention to the chat box where there's a web link on how to volunteer. You've generously given a financial contribution if you're part of this event, which we're thankful for. Of course, more would always be helpful, but that's not the only way to make a difference. We're looking for folks to volunteer, to spread the word, to mobilize. So have a look at that link and think about taking a shift. It could make a big difference. Reverend, I was thinking about some of the things that hang in the balance of the Senate. Of course, it is a great moral and political relief that we're going to have a new president. Many of the worst abuses that we've seen, the cruelty, the lying, all of these things that are happening internationally, we know that those will come to an end. But a lot of the things we most hope for in these years ahead depend on the Senate. And one of the best examples is the possibility of an economic agenda that lifts everybody up. The president wants that to happen, the president-elect, but no president can do that alone. And that's an example of something that depends almost inarguably and irrevocably on whether we have a Senate majority. I know the way you have talked about, even just now, the moral stakes of the economy is resonating powerfully with voters. I also think that there's an economic agenda that's proactive that you've made clear and that you've shared, and would love to have a chance to hear a little bit more about that, unless we've once again lost you to these.
Can you hear me?
Okay, there we go. We're hearing your audio.
I need someone to open my video. Yeah.
There we go. Go ahead.
So, yeah, I as it turns out, very often the right thing to do is also the smart thing to do. In my state, for example, we're one of 12 states right now that's yet still refusing to expand Medicaid. I think it's immoral. You're to be the richest nation in the world and not to recognize that healthcare is a human right. But it also turns out to be incredibly unintelligent, it seems to me, for Georgians to pay our federal taxes like everybody else does, and to subsidize healthcare in Illinois, New York, and California, while literally our hospitals are closing. I was in Cuthbert, Georgia. The 8th hospital in our state is closed in 10 years. It's devastated rural healthcare in a county that, believe it or not, in terms of the rate of death for COVID-19, was a coronavirus hotspot nationally, and their hospital has closed. Not to mention the drag that is on a local economy in a town that small. Often the hospital is the biggest employer directly and indirectly in the area. And you can take that and multiply it over a range of issues. I mean, I think the fundamental question before us, Mayor, in this moment, as an American people, is do we want to be an increasingly fearful and hateful society where we're all afraid of one another? And it's the fear then that drives the hate. And then we all go into our silos, both ideologically and in some ways physically. Or do we want to build the beloved community? I happen to think that there aren't enough gates, and there aren't enough gated communities for a society where most of the people don't have the basic things of human dignity. And then there are a few folks who have all they need and then some. Many of us have visited countries like that. It doesn't feel really good, where it's not who we are as an American people. And I think that when we invest in our children, all of our children, regardless of their zip code, we unleash the entrepreneurial power and possibility of the American economy, which is why we got to make sure that all of our kids have access to a good quality education, that we shore up the resources of our public schools, and that we make sure that when young people come out of college, in a nation now where student debt has surpassed credit card debt and auto loans, that we make sure that our children don't have a mortgage before they have a mortgage. Because it's a drag not only on them and their aspirations, I think it's a drag on the economy. I think the moral thing to do, to center people who are vulnerable and just give them a chance, ladders of opportunity, is also the smart thing to do on a whole range of subjects.
Makes perfect sense, and I think is another example of how to build those coalitions that are needed. I know that we're drawing close to the end of our hour together. Anything else that look, I think the folks here, this is your choir. Everybody on this call is already wanting to make sure that you win. What else can we do, all of us, to make sure that we have good news to celebrate in January?
Sure. Well, thank you so much. I'm going to talk fast before we lose, before we're off of this call again. Continue to support our campaign. Our website is warnock4georgia.com. Please tell your family members and friends. I'd love to see folks volunteer, because I think this race is going to hinge on turnout. Mm-hmm. And people all over the country can help us in that regard through phone banking, texting. If our voters show up, be really clear. When you think about all the states that we were looking at that could have flipped, as it turns out, Georgia was best positioned anyway. And I won't get into the weeds here, but we had some great races, great candidates, and not to put any pressure on myself at all. We actually were we were the best positioned anyway. And what I'm saying is, when I look at what we've done in this state in terms of voter registration, mobilization, if our voters show up, we're going to win. And the other side knows it, which is why they're going to try to suppress the turnout through negative ads, distractions, and obfuscation. And we've got to keep centering the concerns of ordinary people, which I'll do, but we need other folk to help us to turn out to vote. And we'll win.
You will. I mean, that's the thing. As you said, if everybody votes, you're going to be the next senator from Georgia, and that would be such a blessing for all of us. So, thanks to everybody who's contributed again to make this event a success. If you can do more, please consider it. If you can think of 3 or 5 people you know who might be willing to pitch in, please send that link around and share it with them. Consider taking a shift to phone bank. Definitely a real need to call and make sure that everybody everybody knows that this race is on, knows how to vote, how early voting works, making sure they're registered, all of that the campaign's going to do a great job of getting you, even if you're not normally comfortable calling total strangers, they will do a great job of getting you spun up and informed. Reverend, I got to tell you, when I hear you speak in these terms, my head respects the wisdom of the policy positions you're supporting, but also my heart feels fuller. And it's one of the many reasons I can't wait to have your voice on the floor of the United States Senate. Thank you for your leadership, and we are all here to help you every way that we can.
Bless you, brother. And I mean that from my heart. You're now my brother from another mother. And thanks everybody for being here on the call. Let's go win the future for all of our children.
Sounds good. Let's get to work. Thanks, everybody.